I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my backyard that morning, not because I heard anything unusual or saw obvious destruction right away, but because the space itself felt different, strangely open, as if something solid and familiar had quietly disappeared overnight. The air moved too freely, sounds traveled farther than they should have, and that uneasy feeling in my chest pushed me to look toward the fence line where my eyes immediately locked onto a sight that made my stomach sink. Right in the middle of my fence was a wide, ugly gap where several wooden panels had once stood, not broken or damaged by weather, but cleanly and deliberately cut away. The exposed wood was pale and sharp, splinters sticking out like evidence of a fresh wound, making it painfully clear that this had been done intentionally and recently. As I stood there trying to process how someone could so casually remove part of my private property, I heard movement from the other side of the fence line, the soft crunch of gravel and the rustle of leaves, and before I could even react, a woman stepped through the opening as if it were a doorway designed just for her. It was Patricia Garrison, the president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, emerging into my yard with her small dog tucked under one arm and a large tote bag hanging from her shoulder. She did not look startled or embarrassed, nor did she pause or ask permission. She simply walked across my backyard with the confidence of someone who believed she had every right to be there. When she finally noticed me standing frozen a few feet away, she offered nothing more than a dismissive glance and muttered that this route was faster before continuing on her way as if my yard were a public sidewalk rather than a family's private space. My name is David Sullivan, and my wife Sarah and I have lived in Maple Ridge Estates for 12 years, long enough to raise our 2 children here and build a life that felt stable and secure. That backyard was not just land behind our house, it was where our kids played, where birthdays were celebrated, where quiet evenings felt safe and uninterrupted. 8 years earlier, we had invested a significant amount of money to install that fence professionally, making sure every permit was approved and every measurement was verified so that it sat clearly within our property line. The fence was never meant to be decorative. It existed to give our family privacy, safety, and peace of mind. Patricia had moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago, and within 6 months she had positioned herself as HOA president. From that point forward, the atmosphere of the community began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. Inspections became frequent, rules were enforced with sudden enthusiasm, and violation notices started appearing for things that had never been issues before. At the same time, Patricia's own property remained mysteriously flawless, never cited and never questioned, no matter how strict the rules became for everyone else. The following morning, still trying to understand what had happened, I went to Patricia's house to confront her directly. She answered the door wearing a pastel blazer and holding a clipboard like it was an extension of her authority, and when I asked why my fence had been cut, she showed no surprise whatsoever. She calmly informed me that the fence had been obstructing HOA access and that she had simply corrected the issue. When I explained that the fence had been there for years and was fully on my property, she crossed her arms and claimed there was an old easement, stating that the community mailboxes were on the other side of my yard and that walking around them wasted time. I told her plainly that she had destroyed private property, but she dismissed my words with a small smile and warned me that if I rebuilt the fence, I would be fined $500 per day. With that, she ended the conversation and wished me a nice day, as if she had just done me a favor. Over the next several days, the situation escalated rapidly. Formal violation notices began appearing in my mailbox, and Patricia continued using the opening in my fence, sometimes alone and sometimes with friends, all of them crossing my yard without hesitation or concern. A neighbor eventually pulled me aside and admitted that Patricia had been complaining about my fence in HOA meetings for over a year, repeatedly labeling it a safety hazard despite the fact that there were multiple other paths leading to the mailboxes. This particular route was simply more convenient for her, and she had decided that her convenience outweighed my property rights. That was the moment everything became clear. This was never about safety, rules, or community standards. It was about control, and Patricia had mistaken my initial shock and restraint for weakness. Instead of continuing to argue, I made a deliberate decision to stop reacting emotionally and start preparing carefully, because if this was going to be a battle, it would be fought with facts, documentation, and patience rather than anger. What Patricia didn't realize was that by turning my backyard into her personal shortcut, she had crossed a line that would not be ignored, and the consequences of that choice were only just beginning. By the time I decided to take action, I understood one thing very clearly. Patricia was counting on intimidation, confusion, and fatigue to make me give up. She believed that if she buried me under fines and threats, I would eventually surrender and let her keep her shortcut. What she didn't expect was that I had stopped playing defense and started building a case. The first step was a licensed surveyor. I hired one quietly, without notifying the HOA, and watched as he spent hours measuring every inch of my property with professional precision. Patricia hovered nearby the entire time, pretending to water her lawn while clearly photographing us with her phone, as if evidence could somehow change reality. When the survey report arrived, it confirmed exactly what I already knew. My fence sat more than 3 feet inside my property line, with no easement, no shared access, and no ambiguity of any kind. Armed with that documentation, I contacted an attorney. When she reviewed the survey, the permits, and the HOA's claims, she actually laughed. She explained that the map Patricia was using predated the entire subdivision and showed farmland boundaries that no longer existed. In other words, Patricia had authorized the destruction of private property using outdated records that had no legal standing whatsoever. We sent her a formal demand letter outlining the cost of repairs and legal fees, giving her a clear opportunity to resolve the matter quietly. She refused. Instead, the violations increased. My trash cans were suddenly an inch out of place. My grass was allegedly too tall. My children's chalk drawings on the driveway were labeled property defacement. Every notice was timestamped, logged, and saved. Patricia wasn't enforcing rules anymore, she was retaliating. That's when we filed suit. The court summons changed everything. Patricia's confidence evaporated almost overnight. First came the apologies that didn't sound sincere, then the homemade cookies left at our door, followed by subtle threats disguised as warnings. None of it mattered anymore because everything was documented, and the truth doesn't change under pressure. In court, Patricia arrived looking confident, but that confidence didn't last long. The judge asked simple questions that demanded simple answers. Had she verified the property line before authorizing the fence removal? She hadn't. Did she personally approve the action? She admitted that she did. When the survey and permits were presented, there was no room left for excuses. The judge ruled swiftly, awarding damages for repairs, legal fees, and court costs, then made something else painfully clear. He stated that Patricia had abused her position for personal convenience and that her actions were willful and malicious. The consequences didn't end there. At an emergency HOA meeting, neighbors lined up one by one with stories of harassment, retaliation, and selective enforcement. The vote to remove Patricia as HOA president was unanimous. Even she didn't vote to save herself. Shortly after, her employer placed her on administrative leave after discovering she had been sending HOA violations using her work email. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover the damages, stating she had acted outside her authority, which caused premiums to rise for everyone, including her. 10 days later, the check arrived. I rebuilt the fence taller and stronger than before and lined it with dense, thorny shrubs so there would be no shortcuts, no misunderstandings, and no exceptions. A few months later, a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's house. She never looked in my direction as she left the neighborhood for good. Today, Maple Ridge Estates has a new HOA president, one who understands a simple but important rule: HOA authority ends at the property line. And every time I step into my backyard now, that fence doesn't just represent privacy or security. It stands as a reminder that power without accountability always collapses, and when someone crosses the line into what isn't theirs, consequences eventually follow.